The first real trouble of my summer started on a warm Saturday afternoon, when the smell of pine trees and the soft ripple of the lake were all I cared about. My cabin, a sturdy log home built by my grandfather decades ago, sat on private land I'd inherited, and more importantly, it was well outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Still, that didn't stop Karen, a woman whose name had become a curse around here, from trying to extend her control beyond the HOA boundaries. I'd already dealt with her petty complaints before, accusing me of blocking the scenic view with my dock, claiming my fishing boat was environmentally harmful, even demanding that I get permission to repaint my own cabin. But that day, it wasn't Karen who showed up first, it was her son, Trevor. The kid was barely 20, with a perpetual scowl and the swagger of someone who'd never been told no. He pulled up with two friends in a shiny sports car, music blasting, and marched right up to my porch like he owned the place. "Mom says you've got the best view of the lake," he announced, grinning like a fox. "I'm throwing a party here tonight. You'll need to clear out by 6. At first, I laughed, thinking it was a joke. I even offered the kid a glass of iced tea, figuring maybe he was just being a brat in the summer heat. But his friends started unloading beer coolers from the car, and one of them was already setting up a portable speaker on my lawn. My smile vanished. "You need to get those back in your car and leave. This is private property," I said firmly, stepping off the porch. Trevor crossed his arms, cocky grin still plastered on his face. "You must not know who my mom is," he said, as if that explained everything. "She's on the HOA board, and she can make life here miserable. Trust me, you'll want to cooperate." That was when I felt my badge, clipped to my belt, shift as I folded my arms. It wasn't a secret that I was the chief of police for the county, but I didn't like throwing my rank around unless I had to. This, however, was edging into had to territory. Before I could respond, a familiar screeching voice cut through the summer air. Karen herself came striding down the dirt path from the road, wearing oversized sunglasses and an expression that suggested she'd just bitten into a lemon. "Trevor, darling, have you told him the plan?" she called out. "We're hosting a summer kickoff party tonight for the community, and your cabin is the perfect spot. I've already told the board you're donating it for the evening." I blinked at her in disbelief. "Donating? You mean trespassing," I corrected. "This isn't community property, it's mine, and if you and your son don't clear out in the next 5 minutes, you'll be facing charges." She scoffed, stepping closer. "You wouldn't dare arrest me, I know the sheriff personally." I smiled slowly, enjoying the fact that she clearly didn't know the sheriff worked under me. Karen's expression hardened when she noticed the glint of my badge. "Wait, you're law enforcement?" she asked, her voice losing some of its smugness. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and lowered my tone. "Not just law enforcement, I'm the chief of police for this county. And right now, you and your son are trespassing on my property, attempting to host an unlicensed event involving alcohol, and harassing a property owner. I could have every officer in my department here in 5 minutes." As if on cue, the crunch of tires on gravel sounded from behind the cabin. A convoy of police cruisers pulled in, and 6 uniformed officers stepped out, all off-duty friends who'd been invited over for a barbecue later that afternoon. The look on Karen's face shifted from defiance to something close to panic. Trevor muttered, Mom." But she didn't answer, her eyes locked on the officers now fanning out across my yard. She had no idea this was only the beginning of her bad day. Karen didn't back down right away. In fact, she did what Karens do best, doubled down on a bad idea. "You can't stop a community event," she barked, even as 2 of my officers stood by, arms crossed. "You're abusing your position, I'll have you reported to the mayor." Her voice was so shrill it probably carried across the lake, startling the loons. Trevor shuffled awkwardly beside her, clearly losing his nerve as my officers began asking his friends for ID. The beer coolers, the massive Bluetooth speaker, and the fact that none of them looked over 21 were going to be a problem for them. Karen, however, seemed oblivious to the growing stack of violations piling up. "Mom," Trevor hissed, "we should just go," but she snapped, "Quiet, Trevor. Mommy's handling this." That's when I decided to make it crystal clear she wasn't handling anything. I stepped forward and said, "Karen, you've got 2 options. Leave now and consider this a warning, or stay and I'll process you both for trespassing, supplying alcohol to minors, and disturbing the peace." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water before she let out a dramatic laugh. "Oh, You think you scare me? I know my rights, and I'm calling my lawyer." She whipped out her phone and started pacing near the cabin steps while Trevor was practically inching toward his car. My officers continued calmly logging everything: license plates, the number of open containers, even the placement of the speaker. A few curious neighbors had wandered over from the shoreline, whispering to each other with that eager, "Karen's at it again, look." One of them, old Mr. Jensen, leaned against a tree and muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Last time she pulled something like this, she ended up paying $3,000 in fines." Karen shot him a glare but didn't respond. Meanwhile, I radioed the station to log the incident officially, a move that would ensure there was a paper trail if she tried to twist the story later. By the time her lawyer answered, who I strongly suspected was just a cousin who once took a paralegal course, my patience was wearing thin. She strutted back toward me, phone on speaker, ready to put on a performance. "Yes, we're here with an abusive police officer threatening us," she announced dramatically. Before the voice on the other end could even respond, one of my officers, Deputy Alvarez, stepped forward and held up a small recording device. "Ma'am, just so you're aware, everything from the moment you stepped on this property is being recorded, both audio and video," he said. Her jaw tightened. "That's illegal," she snapped. "Actually," Alvarez replied smoothly, "it's not. This is private property, and the owner consented to the recording." She looked like she'd just bitten into another lemon. Trevor finally blurted, "Mom, seriously, let's just go. This is getting bad." But Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. With all the flair of someone who thought she was starring in a courtroom drama, Karen crossed her arms and declared, "Fine. We'll leave, but this isn't over. I'm taking this to the HOA board. We'll see how smug you are when they revoke your right to live here." That was the moment the entire group of neighbors who'd been watching burst into laughter. Even my officers couldn't help smirking. I stepped closer so she could see just how serious I was. "Karen, I'm not part of your HOA. Never have been, never will be. You have zero authority here, and the more you try to pretend you do, the deeper you're going to bury yourself." I let the words hang in the air for a beat before adding, "And by the way, since you and your son drove onto my property without permission, I'm filing a formal trespassing report. That'll go on record. Good luck explaining that at your next board meeting." Her face went pale, and for once, she didn't have a comeback. She grabbed Trevor's arm and stormed toward the car, but I knew this wasn't the last time she'd try something. For a few blessed weeks after the incident, the lake was peaceful again. I almost thought Karen had learned her lesson. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like her, it's that they treat humiliation as a temporary inconvenience, not a deterrent. Sure enough, on the Saturday before the 4th of July, I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel outside my cabin. I looked out the window expecting friends for a planned cookout. Instead, there was Karen's SUV, decked out in red, white, and blue bunting like it was leading a parade. Behind it came two more vehicles stuffed with people I didn't recognize, hauling coolers, folding tables, and banners. I stepped onto the porch, already feeling the headache coming on. Karen hopped out, this time dressed in a red blazer and clutching a clipboard. "This year's Independence Day Community Gala is here," she announced grandly, as though she were unveiling a gift. "And you, dear Chief, have the honor of hosting it on your beautiful lakefront." I didn't even get a word in before her volunteers started unloading. Someone rolled out a massive grill onto my driveway, another person began tying balloons to my porch rail. My officers, who had arrived early for the cookout, stood frozen for a second before breaking into chuckles. I stepped down from the porch and held up my hand. "All right, everyone, stop. This is private property, not a public venue. You've got 60 seconds to get back in your cars and leave." Karen waved dismissively. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. You should be honored. The whole neighborhood will be here. It's good PR for you." I could feel my blood pressure rising, but instead of yelling, I walked over to my police cruiser, flipped on the body cam, and began narrating the situation for the record. That's when I noticed two of her guests were unloading cases of beer, again, in full view of the miners milling around. The situation escalated quickly from there. I radioed in for a patrol unit to assist with crowd control and had my off-duty officers start guiding people back toward their vehicles. Karen, furious that her gala was being dismantled, marched up to me, jabbing her finger in the air. "You are the most arrogant, power-hungry," she began, but her rant was cut short by the wail of sirens approaching from the main road. 2 patrol cars pulled in, lights flashing. As soon as they stepped out, the younger officer whispered something to the senior deputy, who smirked and looked directly at Karen. "Ma'am, before we go any further, can I see your ID?" She blinked, confused, then fished it out of her purse. The deputy glanced at it, then at her. "You might want to come with us. There's an active warrant for your arrest in the next county, unpaid fines for an unpermitted event last summer." The color drained from her face. The silence that followed was almost satisfying enough to replace my morning coffee. Neighbors who had gathered along the road gasped, a few pulling out their phones to record. Trevor, who'd been lingering near the car, muttered something under his breath before sliding into the passenger seat like he wanted to disappear. Karen tried to argue, "This is a mistake. I'm an upstanding community leader," but the deputies calmly read her rights and escorted her toward the patrol car. As they loaded her in, I stepped forward, just close enough for her to hear. "You know, Karen, I was going to just give you another trespassing ticket today, but I guess the law beat me to it." She glared at me over the top of the car door before it closed, and the convoy of police vehicles pulled away. My yard was clear within 15 minutes, and as the smell of burgers grilling filled the air, one of my officers raised a toast, to the chief, and to never letting Karen win. I clinked my glass with theirs, finally enjoying the peace I'd fought so hard to keep.